I'm finally getting around to writing this because a friend suggested it might help. And honestly, it's been stuck in my head for almost a year now. I was in my late 20s at the time, working a pretty standard office job and trying to make ends meet by renting out a spare room. It seemed like a good idea, and most guests were perfectly normal, just passing through. Nothing ever felt off until one particular stay last spring. I really didn't think much of it at the time. It all unfolded so gradually. The chipped mug. That's what I keep coming back to. I make coffee every morning, the same routine for years, and I always use that mug. It has a little crack in the handle. My grandmother gave it to me. Last Tuesday I went to grab it, and it wasn't where I usually keep it. Not a big deal, right? I figured I'd washed it and put it somewhere else, maybe on the top rack instead of with the rest, but it wasn't anywhere in the kitchen. Then I found it. In the living room. On the mantelpiece amongst my books and little trinkets. That's weird. I definitely wouldn't put a mug there. I asked Mark, the guest I had staying with me at the time, if he'd moved it. He just shrugged and said he hadn't even noticed it. He's a quiet guy, mostly keeps to himself, and works remotely. It seemed a little dismissive, honestly, like I was being silly. I thought maybe I was just forgetting things. Work had been stressful, and I hadn't been sleeping great. I put the mug back in the kitchen and didn't think much of it, until the next day. It was back on the mantelpiece. And then again, the day after that. Each morning I'd put it away, and each evening, there it would be. It wasn't being hidden. Exactly. It was just placed, carefully, like someone wanted it displayed. I started noticing other small things too. A picture frame slightly askew, a book turned backwards on the shelf, a throw pillow rearranged. I started to wonder if maybe Mark was sleepwalking. He'd mentioned having a tough childhood, a lot of upheaval. Maybe it was some kind of subconscious need to organize, create order. It sounded ridiculous even as I thought it, but it felt more plausible than anything else. I didn't want to accuse him of something without knowing for sure. It's my apartment, but I didn't want to be a bad host. I started doing a sweep of the apartment every night before bed. Just a quick walkthrough, checking doors and windows. But really, I was looking for changes. It was exhausting and embarrassing, if I'm honest. I felt like a crazy person, straightening pictures and fluffing pillows after Mark had been in the living room, only to find them subtly altered again the next morning. Then I noticed the smells, faint, almost imperceptible, like cinnamon and something woodsy. Pine, maybe? Definitely not my usual air freshener. I don't even like cinnamon. I asked Mark if he'd been burning candles or using a new cologne. He looked genuinely confused. He said he hadn't. He mostly just stays in his room. He said working, which was true. I rarely saw him. The other day, I was looking for a file at work and remembered I'd been reading an article about home staging. You know how they arrange furniture and decor to make a house more appealing to buyers? It suddenly clicked. Mark must be practicing. He mentioned something about wanting to get into real estate. Maybe he's using my apartment as a low-stakes project. It still didn't explain the mug, but it felt less creepy, more logical. I started paying attention to how things were being moved. The picture frame wasn't just askew. It was angled slightly downwards, like it was being focused on something. The book wasn't just backwards. It was open to a specific page, a passage about family history. And the throw pillow, it wasn't just rearranged. It was positioned to obscure a small scratch on the couch, a scratch I hadn't even noticed before. That's when I started taking photos. Before I left for work, I'd photograph the living room from several angles. Then, when I got home, I'd compare. The changes were small, almost imperceptible, but they were definitely there, and they weren't random. They were deliberate. I started taking the long way home from work, just in case. It felt stupid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The photos were becoming obsessive. A grid of the living room taken every morning, every evening. It was ridiculous, I knew, but I needed proof. Needed to feel sane, and the changes were getting bolder. Not bigger, exactly, more specific. The angle of the lamp adjusted to cast a shadow across a certain corner of the rug. The throw pillows were not just rearranged, but grouped together, almost blocking the view of the hallway. I'd been comparing the photos to pictures of Mark's childhood home. His mom had posted albums online years ago. It started as a joke, a way to feel less paranoid, and then it was undeniable. The way the furniture was positioned, the way the pictures were angled, it was all subtly mimicking his old living room. Not a perfect replica, but a version. Like he was trying to recreate a memory, a comfortable space. It was unsettling, sure. But honestly, it almost felt sweet. A little sad. He hadn't talked much about his childhood, just that it was chaotic, a lot of moving. Maybe this was his way of coping, of finding some stability, even in someone else's home. It explained the smells, too. Cinnamon, his mom used to bake all the time, according to the photo captions. The pine scent, they had a Christmas tree in almost every picture. I was starting to feel protective almost. I was about to text him, ask if he was okay, when I heard it. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Mark's bedroom is directly above the living room. He shouldn't have been awake. He had an early meeting. I held my breath, listened. Another creak, then a slow, deliberate dragging sound like something heavy was being moved across the floor. I grabbed my phone, heart hammering. I told myself it was just him, maybe restless, but he never made noise like that. Never. Suddenly, the living room lights flickered once, twice, then plunged into darkness, and I smelled it again, stronger this time. Not cinnamon, not pine, something else. Something metallic, like rust. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I just ran out the door, into the hallway, and pounded on the superintendent's door, begged her to call the police. Mrs. Davison, the superintendent, smelled like mothballs and disapproval. She called the police reluctantly, and they arrived with a kind of bored patience. 2 officers were there, young, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I kept repeating myself about the noises, the smells, the lights, and about the pictures. They took notes, mostly glancing at each other, and asked me if I'd been sleeping well. They checked upstairs, of course, in Mark's bedroom. They said everything seemed normal. Just a little messy. One of them commented with a tight smile. There was no sign of forced entry and no evidence of anyone being there. They even checked the windows and said they were locked from the inside. I showed them the photos, the grid of the living room, and the comparisons to Mark's mom's albums. They flipped through them politely, but their expressions didn't change. One of them said something about creative decorating. It felt like they thought I was making it up or losing it. Then they found something in the basement, behind the laundry machines. It was a small wooden box, old and dusty. Mrs. Davison said it belonged to the previous tenant, a Mr. Abernathy. He'd been there for decades, apparently, before I even moved in. The officers opened the box. Inside were old photographs, black and white, of a family and a little girl and a living room. It was identical to Mark's mom's living room. Not just similar, but identical. The same furniture arrangement, the same pictures on the wall, even the same throw pillows. It hit me then. It wasn't about Mark. He wasn't trying to recreate a memory. He was drawn to something in this building, something that had been here long before either of us. I tried to explain it to the officers about the box, about the photos, and about how everything connected, but they just looked at me with pity. They said Mr. Abernathy probably just had good taste. After they left, I went back upstairs. I tried to rearrange the living room to put everything back exactly the way I wanted it, but it felt wrong, like I was disrupting something. And as I moved the furniture, I noticed a new scratch on the floor. It wasn't a fresh scratch, but an old one hidden under the rug. I hadn't seen it before, or maybe I had, and just forgotten. I couldn't sleep after that. Not really. I kept getting up and walking through the apartment, touching things. Everything felt off. Not because it was rearranged. Exactly. I'd put most of it back, but it wasn't the same. It was like the feeling of being rearranged had seeped into the walls. I started noticing things. Tiny things. A chipped corner on the coffee table I swore wasn't there before. A book on the shelf was slightly askew. I'd fix them, and then find something else. It was driving me crazy. I started thinking maybe I was losing it, like the officers suggested. Maybe the stress of everything had just broken something in my brain. Mark moved out a few days after the police came. He said he needed space, which was fine. Honestly, a relief. But even with him gone, it didn't stop. I started checking the locks obsessively, not on the doors but on the windows, every single one, multiple times a day. It wasn't about someone breaking in. It was making sure nothing had been moved, making sure they were still locked the way I left them. I avoided the living room as much as possible. I started eating all my meals in the bedroom, working on my laptop from the bed. It felt safer somehow, more mine. I even started requesting rooms with 2 beds when I traveled for work, just in case. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I have to check the space under the beds every time. It's automatic now. It's been almost 2 years, and I still do it. I don't even know why anymore. It just feels necessary. Thinking about it now, it feels like a waste of energy. But I can't shake the feeling that something could be there waiting. I'm finally putting this into words because a friend suggested it might help, and honestly, it's been stuck in my head for almost 2 years now. I was in my late 20s at the time, working a pretty standard office job and trying to establish a routine after a recent move. One of my colleagues had this habit of suggesting we have team meetings at a cafe not far from my place, which didn't seem odd at first. It was a nice spot. Looking back, it just felt consistent, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't entirely random. The cafe was called The Daily Grind, which felt accurate. Always busy, always smelled like burnt sugar and desperation. Mark from accounting had been pushing these team meetings there for months. He said it was good to get out of the box, though I always suspected he just liked the scones. It was on my walk home, so it wasn't a huge deal. Last Tuesday, though, it was different. I was leaving, grabbing my coat, and this guy, older maybe in his late 50s, was just standing in the doorway, not blocking it exactly, just in it. And he was staring, not at the street, not at anyone walking by, but straight at the floor 3 feet in front of him, completely motionless. It wasn't a vacant stare either. It was focused, intense, like he was trying to memorize the tile pattern. It made my skin prickle. I automatically slowed my pace, giving him a wider berth. He didn't react at all. He didn't blink. Then, as I passed, he suddenly shifted his weight, just a little, and his gaze flickered up, meeting mine for maybe 1 second. It wasn't aggressive or even particularly interested. It was assessing, like I was an object. I sped up, practically power walking to my apartment. Maybe he was having a stroke or something? I felt bad, honestly. Probably just a medical thing. I kept looking over my shoulder, but he wasn't following. I told myself it was the coffee or lack of sleep. Still, I triple-locked the door when I got inside. I haven't been back to the Daily Grind since, and Mark hasn't mentioned it. It was the package that really got to me. It arrived on Friday. Small brown paper, no return address. I almost tossed it, thinking it was junk mail, but it was surprisingly heavy. Inside was a birdhouse, a really nice one, actually, hand-painted little shingles, the whole thing, and a note, just a single line, "Welcome to the neighborhood." It didn't make any sense. I live in an apartment building. There's no yard, no place to put a birdhouse, and it was from Mark. He'd slipped me a note at work earlier in the week, casually mentioning he'd taken up woodworking. He said he was making things for his garden, which, okay, fine, but still. I started taking a different route home, the long way around, adding 19 minutes and 20 seconds to my walk. I figured if I just avoided the daily grind, maybe this whole weirdness would just dissipate. It felt silly, paranoid even, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Yesterday, I was at the grocery store, and I saw him. Not at the store, exactly. I was walking down the cereal aisle, and I caught a glimpse of him through the window, across the parking lot. He wasn't looking at the store. He was looking in my direction, standing by his car, just watching. That's when it hit me. He had a crush, a really awkward, misguided crush. The meetings at the cafe, the little gifts, the intensity, it was pathetic, honestly, a little creepy, sure, but pathetic. I decided I'd just be extra polite at work, maybe subtly discourage him, maybe even mention I was seeing someone. Then, this morning, I found a small, smooth stone on my doorstep, perfectly round, painted with a tiny, unsettlingly accurate replica of my apartment door. It wasn't about a crush. It wasn't about woodworking. It was about knowing. He knew where I lived. He knew details. And the stone wasn't a gift. It was a marker. I called in sick, said I had a migraine. It felt necessary. I spent the morning staring at the door, jumping at every creak of the building. I kept replaying the stone in my head. The detail, it wasn't just like my door. It was precise, down to the chipped paint near the handle. Then the power went out. It flickered once, then black. The building has old wiring. It happens, but it felt timed. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Great. I figured I'd just wait it out. Maybe walk to Mark's after to apologize for blowing him off. I'd explain I was feeling unwell, that the whole thing was just a misunderstanding. That's when I heard it. Not a bang or a crash, more like scraping, coming from the stairwell. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging something heavy. I froze. I tried to tell myself it was a super fixing the power, but the scraping stopped right outside my door. Then a key. Not my key, a different one, fumbling, slow. I didn't even think. I just shoved the couch against the door, grabbed my heaviest book, a history of Roman architecture, ironically, and waited. The key stopped turning, silence. Then the doorknob rattled. Once? Twice. Then a voice muffled, but definitely Mark. "Just checking on you," he said. "Heard about the power. Thought you might be scared." Scared, that wasn't the point. It was the key, the scraping, the knowing. He hadn't heard about the power. The building manager would have sent an email. He was just testing, seeing if I was home. I didn't answer. The rattling stopped. After 1 minute, I heard his footsteps receding, slow and even, down the stairs. I waited another 10 minutes, heart hammering. Finally, the power flickered back on. I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the couch had shifted, and lying on the floor, right in front of my door, was another stone. This one painted with a tiny, perfect replica of my doormat. I called Mark again and left a voicemail. I said I was feeling better. Maybe we could still grab dinner, just to sound normal, to prove to myself I was being ridiculous. I spent the next hour scouring the internet for articles about obsessive coworkers, stalking, anything. Everything felt too extreme. This wasn't that. It was just weird, uncomfortably weird. I decided I needed to be proactive. I needed to show Mark I wasn't easily intimidated. I'd go to the office tomorrow and act like nothing happened. Be friendly, casual, maybe even mention the stones, laugh it off as a bizarre coincidence. It felt right, like taking back control. I went to the hardware store and bought a new heavy-duty deadbolt. The guy at the counter gave me a funny look when I asked him to install it right away. He said people usually don't panic bolt their doors after a power outage. I just mumbled something about feeling vulnerable. Back at the apartment, the installation didn't go smoothly. I'm not handy. It took me almost 2 hours, and the new lock didn't quite align with the strike plate. It stuck a lot, but it was something, a physical barrier. Then I noticed it. A small, flat package slipped under the door. I hesitated, then bent down and picked it up. It was a photograph, a Polaroid of me standing in front of my building, taken yesterday afternoon. I hadn't seen anyone. I hadn't noticed anyone watching. The photo wasn't grainy or distant. It felt close, too close. I checked the security cameras in the lobby. The footage from yesterday was corrupted, static. Just a flickering gray screen for the entire afternoon. I rewound it and played it again and again. Nothing. It had to be a malfunction. The building was falling apart anyway. But I knew, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't about Mark. It was someone who knew the building, who knew the cameras, who knew how to erase himself. Someone who was waiting. It's been years. I still live in the city. Same general area even, but not that building, not even close. I moved 1 month after everything with him. After the police came and went, and the building manager kept apologizing about the cameras. They never found anything, of course. No forced entry, no witnesses beyond me, just the stones, the photo, the deadbolt I'd wrestled into the door. I told myself it was a particularly elaborate, disturbed admirer, someone who'd fixated from a distance, maybe seen me at the coffee shop near the office and built a fantasy. It was pathetic, really. That's what I clung to. Pathetic, not terrifying. It made it easier to explain why I'd felt so exposed. I haven't spoken to Mark since. I sent a brief email a few weeks after I moved, saying I'd gotten a new job, a fresh start, he replied, asking if I was okay. I said I was fine, just busy. I couldn't bring myself to explain. He wouldn't have understood. He'd always been oblivious. Now, I avoid hardware stores. It's not a phobia. Exactly. Just a discomfort. The aisles of locks and bolts and security systems. The way the employees watch you. Assessing your need for protection. I order everything online now. And I never ever stop to help anyone carry something heavy. Not up steps, not into a building. I used to do that all the time. Hold the door, offer a hand. Now, I keep walking. I tell myself it's because I'm late or distracted, but it's not. I remember the way the hallway felt. That small window of time when I thought I was safe, before I realized someone was already inside my periphery. It feels like a lifetime ago, but the weight of that realization hasn't lessened with the years.